My name is Sophia Ellenberg, and this is my site proposal and final presentation. Beginning with the site plan, programmatically it's laid out so that the artists have their own private space on the most left-hand side with studios, and the center contains more semi-public functions such as the library, computer lab, children's museum, office caretaker, and gallery with a small playground adjacent to it. And then as you move farther and farther to the right, you begin to enter multi-purpose spaces, which can be used for large events, holding functions, classes, gatherings. And then there's also the communal eating aspect to the right with the cafe and kitchen. And so the parking lot also serves as the main entry and focal point, connecting these two sections of the site, going from the semi-public to public. And the parking lot can serve additional functions as a marketplace with tents and tables, while also being utilized as an overflow stage and seating area for large presentations or performances that happen in the multi-purpose spaces adjacent to it. And so you can see the flow to private, from public to private emphasized a little bit more here, because the buildings on the left are actually quite smaller and more intimate, and then as you move to the right, they do get larger volumetrically in space and height. And so you can see better in the axon that volumetrically the spaces are rectangular, but then contain angular and cut roof structures that create overhangs and interesting spaces and interesting shapes and geometry that relate them all back to each other and relate them to the site as well through the angular gardens and paths that are cut between them. So once again, the entrance and circulation, there is one large main entrance and then two side entrances on the back, and then there's only one entrance into the artist area, making it the most private. And so as you can see, the privacy is the darkest area on the most left side, and then it begins to move into semi-public and then more public as you begin to get to the center where the main entrance is. For the demolition, I did get rid of several existing buildings and several parts of the existing buildings to make way for new ones, but several buildings were also technically remodeled or altered and edited at their current location. So the first multi-purpose space contains a cafe and a small space for an exercise class or small group gathering, with also an eating space next to the cafe and a large performance space. And so these shapes and cuts come from textile research on Gute Stolz done earlier in the semester, and you can see that the floor is actually very similar and derives from the original floor plan created, with some alterations to the site and additions made on for it. You can see in this section that there are large cuts and angles present in the roof, and that some of the floor actually comes up to create a bench in the middle. And the shapes create almost like a larger than lifelike exaggerated corrugated material, which is what the roof is made out of. And so the second multi-purpose space contains similar geometry in the shapes and structure, but is at a slightly larger scale in order to relate the two spaces back to each other and create a relationship within the site and the multi-purpose spaces. However, this one contains a kitchen, the pharmacy, a small children's play area from large climbing towers, and a secondary performing space that's a little bit smaller but could still be used for gatherings and functions or catering events coming off of the kitchen. And so as you can see, this structure is a very similar but slightly larger shape from the original, and it draws upon the original architecture element structure that was created from the Gute Stolz weaving and textile research as well. And both roofs sit comfortably above the wall to create a visual effect from the street, so that all you can see is the roof and the top of the columns coming up, and gives the illusion of the space that's and activities that are happening underneath them. So the structure, many of the wooden beams, it's made up of wooden beams with metal with steel columns, and then wood paneling is the underneath of the roof. So it's corrugated metal roofing, then a wooden structure, wood paneling, and steel columns connected to the flooring. You can see through this section cut through it that the wooden roof actually sits about halfway up the larger beams. So there is the beams do protrude a little bit at the bottom underneath. And so then to take a closer look at the columns are connected to the roof by connection to the large beams, and then going through to the ground through a concrete block with studs or screws in them. And then on the side, a small ground gutter or curb, a little dip exists for water overflow. And the structure of these multipurpose sites were heavily influenced by the Perry Lakes Park Pavilion structure. They draw on similar structural elements. And so you can see the space program through this perspective, and how everything would be able to come to life in it, because there is the natural divisions of the column structure, and the vegetation do create 3 spaces, one for eating and sitting, one for small group gatherings and exercise classes, and one for large performances, as well as being adjacent to the cafe and the parking lot and the main entrance. And you can see the wood paneling and where the beams slightly protrude from the roof and the effect that it gives. You can see again in another space where multiple things can occur, because this is the children's playground, which is adjacent to the gallery and also connected to the main entrance of the Children's Museum. And it allows for a more flexible space, and it connects everything back to the site, and creates a natural flow through the site and from the public to semi-public private functions. And it creates a transparency between one programmatic function to the other that you can see through the gallery out to the playground, and creates a nice space and a more flexible connected site. And thank you for watching my final presentation.